You threw my wife out. Big mistake. These sharp words from billionaire Thomas Whitaker ignite a tense showdown as he storms into Le Château to defend Yara Nkosi, his black community organizer wife, against the prejudice of white manager Paula Reynolds and smug patron Victoria Hale. Under the glittering chandeliers of New York's elite dining scene, Yara's dignity is tested, but the real reckoning unfolds when Thomas's presence flips the room's smug amusement into stunned silence. Where are you tuning in from? What do you think happens when wealth, love, and justice collide in a place built on exclusion? This tale of resilience and truth will grip you. Hit that subscribe button to catch our latest stories and share in the comments where you're watching from. Can Yara and Thomas turn the tables on a world that judged her by her skin? Stay with us to find out. Under the shimmering haze of New York's evening skyline, Yara Nkosi emerged from the bustling community center on Harlem's edge, her sneakers scuffing softly against the cracked sidewalk. At 32, she carried the quiet fire of a woman who'd spent her day rallying young black teens through leadership workshops, her hands still dusted with faint chalk from the whiteboard where she'd sketched dreams of empowerment and change. Her dark skin glowed under the streetlight's amber wash, and her loose curls framed a face etched with resilience, a face that had stared down skeptics in boardrooms and lifted spirits in forgotten corners of the city. Tonight, though, held a different spark. In just a few days, she and her husband, Thomas Whitaker, would celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. 10 years since they'd first locked eyes across a candlelit table at Le Château. Back when he was a driven coder with big ideas and she was the organizer whose passion could ignite a crowd. Now Thomas was a tech billionaire, a white man who'd shattered ceilings in a world of algorithms and venture capital. And Yara was his anchor, his partner in every triumph. She wanted to surprise him, to whisk him back to that magical spot where their worlds had collided. Yara paused on the curb, inhaling the city's symphony, the distant honk of taxis, the sizzle of street vendors flipping hot dogs, the faint jazz riff drifting from a nearby bar. Her gray t-shirt hung loosely over faded jeans, practical clothes for a day of real work, not the polished armor of the elite. She glanced at her watch, perfect timing. No need to dress up tonight. This was just a quick stop to lock in the reservation. Next week, she'd dazzle in a sleek dress, her curls swept elegantly, arm in arm with Thomas. But for now, she was simply Yara, unapologetic, grounded, and brimming with anticipation. Her fingers brushed her phone in her pocket, tempted to text him a teasing hint. "Guess where I'm headed?" But she resisted. This was her secret, a gift wrapped in nostalgia. The walk to Le Château took her through the heart of Midtown, where the streets pulsed with energy. Suits hurried past, barking into earpieces. Couples lingered at sidewalk cafes, clinking glasses under string lights. Yara's stride was steady, cutting through the crowd like a river through stone. She loved the city, its grit, its diversity, its unyielding rhythm. As a black woman married to a white billionaire, she'd navigated its undercurrents, the double takes, the whispered assumptions, the invisible barriers that tried to box her in. But tonight, she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on Thomas's boyish grin from their first date, the one that promised a future built on code, courage, and unbreakable love. Le Château loomed ahead, a beacon of opulence on Fifth Avenue, its glass facade rising like a crystal palace amid the urban sprawl. The name evoked old-world elegance, a shrine to New York's power players, guarded by marble steps and velvet ropes. Tall windows spilled warm, golden light onto the pavement, framing scenes of crisp linens, sparkling stemware, and patrons in tailored gowns and tuxedos. Laughter floated out, muffled and refined, like the clink of fine china. Yara tugged at her t-shirt, suddenly aware of the chalk smudges on her jeans. She hadn't planned for glamour tonight. Why should she? This was about sentiment, not spectacle. Next week would be different. Her entrance on Thomas's arm, turning heads for all the right reasons. She approached the entrance, her reflection flickering in the spotless glass doors. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept in. Le Château wasn't her usual haunt. She'd prefer a Harlem soul food spot, digging into collard greens with folks who saw her for who she was, not what she wore. But this place held history. Thomas's nervous laugh over foie gras, his pale hand brushing hers as he vowed to build an empire they'd share. Yara straightened, pushing the heavy door open with a soft whoosh. The air inside enveloped her, cool, scented with lavender and aged oak, a sharp contrast to the city's humid buzz. The marble floor gleamed under her sneakers, each step echoing faintly, like a ripple in a still pond. The dining room unfolded before her, a sea of white tablecloths glowing under crystal chandeliers that dangled like frozen stars. Waiters in crisp black uniforms glided silently, balancing trays of glistening caviar and champagne flutes. The hum of conversation was low and velvet, laced with names of influence and deals sealed over dessert. Heads turned as Yara entered, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Men in pinstriped suits paused mid-sentence. Women in sequin dresses glanced over wineglass rims. Their eyes lingered, not with welcome, but with a cold appraisal that weighed her dark skin, her casual clothes, her very presence in this sanctum of status. She felt it like a chill draft, the unspoken question of why she was here, the judgment that marked her as an intruder. Yara didn't flinch. She'd faced worse. Boardrooms where her ideas were dismissed before she spoke, streets where her skin alone drew suspicion. This was for Thomas, for their decade of defying odds. Her gaze swept the room, landing on the maitre d' station at its center. A sleek podium of polished mahogany, a throne amid the luxury. Behind it stood Paula Reynolds, a white woman in her 40s, her tailored black suit armor-like, her blonde hair pulled into a severe bun. Paula's posture was rigid, her green eyes locking onto Yara the moment she crossed the threshold. That gaze raked over her, from the untamed curls to the scuffed sneakers, lingering on the chalk-dusted hands. No warmth flickered there, only a calculating frost, as if Yara's existence offended the room's polished order. The chatter dipped slightly, a hush rippling through the diners as Yara closed the distance to the podium. She could feel the stares tracking her, some discreet, some brazen. A man in a velvet jacket muttering to his companion, a woman with diamond earrings arching a brow in disdain. The air thickened, charged with that familiar tension Yara knew too well. The weight of being seen as other in spaces built for exclusion. But she met it head-on, her breath steady, her spine straight. This wasn't about fitting in, it was about reclaiming a memory. "Good evening," Yara said, her voice warm and clear, slicing through the invisible barrier. She offered a genuine smile, the kind that had disarmed doubters and built bridges in her community work. "I'd like to make a reservation for next week, if possible." Paula's lips pressed into a thin line, her head tilting just enough to signal dismissal. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, a wall as solid as the marble floor. Yara held her gaze, determination burning bright, ready to weave her story through the frost. Little did Paula know, this simple request was the spark that would ignite a storm. The tension coiled tighter at the maitre d' podium, where Yara Nkosi stood facing Paula Reynolds, the air between them thick as fog rolling off the Hudson. Paula's green eyes, sharp as shards of glass, had already dissected Yara in that single, sweeping glance, cataloging the untamed curls that framed her dark face, the gray t-shirt that bore the faint wrinkles of a day's honest labor, the jeans faded from countless community marches, and the sneakers scuffed by sidewalks that knew no red carpets. It was a look Yara recognized all too well, the silent calculus of worth, where skin tone and attire trumped character in places like this. Paula's fingers rested lightly on the leather-bound reservation book, a relic of exclusivity that might as well have been a fortress gate. The chandelier light danced across its gold-embossed cover, mocking the chalk dust still clinging to Yara's palms. For a moment, Paula said nothing, letting the silence stretch like a taut wire, her lips pursed in a line that screamed dismissal. Then her voice emerged, clipped and arctic, each word a deliberate barrier. "We're fully booked for the next 2 months," she stated flatly, not bothering to flip open the book or feign a check. It was a rejection wrapped in protocol, but Yara caught the undercurrent, the way Paula's gaze lingered on her dark skin, as if it were an affront to the room's pale elegance. The maitre d' straightened slightly, her posture a wall of authority, signaling that this conversation was already over in her mind. Yara's heart thudded, a steady drum against the frost, but she didn't waver. She'd built her life on persistence, turning no into not yet in boardrooms and back alleys alike. Her smile held, small but genuine, a beacon in the chill. "I understand it's popular," she replied, her voice warm and measured, laced with the quiet strength that had rallied crowds for justice. "But it's for a special occasion. My husband and I. This place holds a lot of meaning for us. We had our first date here, years ago." She let the words hang, a bridge extended across the divide, hoping to pierce Paula's armor with a touch of humanity. In her mind's eye, Yara saw that night vividly. Thomas's pale hand reaching for hers across the table, his blue eyes alight with possibility, their worlds merging in a spark that defied expectations. But Paula's expression only hardened, her fingers tightening on the reservation book like a sentinel guarding secrets. Her eyes flicked over Yara again, this time with a sharper edge, tracing the chalk smudges as if they were stains on the pristine marble floor. "As I said, fully booked," she repeated, her tone final, a door slamming shut without apology. There was no offer to check alternatives, no suggestion of a waitlist, nothing but the cold implication that Yara didn't belong in the ledger of Le Château's elite. The air grew heavier, scented with lavender and the faint tang of aged wine, but now it carried a bitter undernote, like the edge of a storm brewing. Yara felt the sting deep in her gut, that familiar ache of being reduced to her appearance, her blackness a barrier in a space designed for invisibility unless you fit the mold. Around them, the dining room pulsed with its rhythm, a symphony of privilege that seemed to mock her presence. Crystal glasses clinked like distant bells, silverware scraped softly against porcelain, and low laughter tinkled from tables draped in linens so white they gleamed like fresh snow. Waiters glided like shadows, their black uniforms blending into the opulent backdrop, serving platters of oysters on ice and delicate foie gras to patrons who exuded effortless wealth. A man in a tailored tuxedo at a nearby table paused his conversation, his eyes narrowing as he glanced over. His companion, a woman dripping in pearls, tilting her head with faint disdain. Their stares were pinpricks, subtle but insistent, weaving a web of judgment that wrapped around Yara like invisible threads. She could almost hear the unspoken questions. Who is she? Why is she here? Doesn't she know this isn't her place? Yara swallowed the rising heat in her throat, refusing to let it show. This wasn't about them, it was about Thomas, about reclaiming a piece of their story in a city that often tried to erase narratives like hers. "Please," she pressed gently, leaning slightly forward, her dark eyes locking onto Paula's with unyielding resolve. "Just a quick look. It's our anniversary. We've come so far since that first night here. My husband built his company from nothing, and I've been right there with him, fighting for our community." Her words carried a quiet plea, wrapped in the steel of someone who'd faced down bigger walls. She pictured Thomas's grin when she'd reveal the surprise, the way his face would light up, erasing the exhaustion of board meetings and billion-dollar deals. Paula's lips twitched, a flicker of something. Irritation, perhaps, or the discomfort of being challenged in her domain. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut like a blade. "This isn't the kind of establishment for walk-ins," she said. The pause heavy with implication, her gaze once more raking over Yara's casual attire. The word walk-ins landed like a slur, laced with the subtext that Yara's jeans and t-shirt, her unpolished authenticity, disqualified her from even asking. The maitre d' straightened again, her hands now clasped tightly over the book, as if protecting it from contamination. The room's hum seemed to amplify in that moment, the elite patrons' glances turning into a collective weight, pressing against Yara's chest. A woman in a sequined gown at another table murmured something to her date, her lips curling into a smirk, while a man with a gold watch shook his head subtly, his amusement veiled but palpable. Yara's pulse quickened, but she held her ground, her breath steadying against the rejection's bite. She'd navigated prejudice before, in funding pitches where her ideas were dismissed, in social circles where her marriage raised eyebrows. But tonight it burned hotter, fueled by the personal stake. I get that it's exclusive, she said, her voice rising just a notch, firm but polite, reclaiming the space. But exclusivity shouldn't mean exclusion. This place meant something to us once. Why can't it again? Her question hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in vulnerability, daring Paula to see beyond the surface. Yet Paula's mask didn't crack. If anything, it solidified, her green eyes narrowing into slits of finality. I'm afraid that's not possible, she replied, her tone laced with a faux politeness that barely masked the disdain. She gestured vaguely toward the door, a subtle ushering away, as if Yara were a stray leaf blown in by the wind. The diner's stares intensified, a ripple of whispers spreading like wildfire, soft chuckles from one table, arched brows from another. Yara felt the isolation keenly, a lone figure in a sea of opulence, her dark skin and simple clothes a stark rebellion against the gilded norm. But beneath the humiliation, a fire kindled. She wouldn't beg, but neither would she break. This rejection was just a hurdle, one she'd leap for the love that had brought her here. The storm was building, unseen, but Yara stood firm, her resolve a quiet thunder waiting to roll. The air at the maitre d' podium crackled with unspoken venom. A taut thread stretched between Yara Nkosi and Paula Reynolds, where Yara's plea for a reservation lingered unanswered, like a fading echo. Paula's green eyes bore into her with the finality of a locked vault, her hands still clenched over the reservation book as if it were a sacred artifact beyond Yara's reach. The dining room's hum buzzed around them, clinking glasses, murmured boasts of stock trades and summer homes, the soft scrape of forks on fine china. But in this intimate standoff, time seemed to stall, suspended in the chill of rejection. Yara's chest tightened, her dark skin prickling under the weight of Paula's gaze, but she held firm, her words a quiet anchor. Exclusivity shouldn't mean exclusion. It was a challenge, laced with the resolve of someone who'd turned barriers into stepping stones. Yet Paula's lips remained sealed, her silence a fortress. Then the air shifted, sliced by the sharp click of heels on marble, a sudden gust of arrogance barreling into the scene like a storm front. Victoria Hale erupted into the space, a white woman in her 50s, broad-shouldered and commanding, her designer suit a canvas of privilege that hugged her frame with unyielding confidence. Her face flushed from a recent sip of vintage Bordeaux, or perhaps her innate sense of entitlement, carried the smug assurance of someone who owned every room she graced. She didn't glance at Yara at first, just shouldered past her to the podium, her perfume, a cloying mix of jasmine and superiority, wafting like a territorial mark. "Paula, darling," Victoria boomed, her voice a whip crack that echoed over the hum, demanding attention without apology. "My table's not ready yet? I specifically requested the 85 Margot decanted by now. What's the holdup?" Paula's demeanor flipped like a switch, the icy mask she'd worn for Yara melting into a fawning smile, her posture softening as she turned to Victoria. "Right away, Mrs. Hale," she cooed, her voice dripping with warmth that Yara had been denied, like sunlight reserved for the chosen. Paula's hands fluttered to life over the reservation book, suddenly animated, as if Victoria's presence had jolted her into deference. Yara stood there, a silent witness to this transformation, the contrast stinging like salt in an open wound, a raw reminder of the hierarchies that colored her world. She swallowed the bitterness, her jaw tightening, and opened her mouth to reiterate her request. "As I was saying," but Victoria cut her off, her head swiveling toward Yara at last, those pale blue eyes raking over her in one swift, dismissive sweep, from the gray t-shirt to the chalk-dusted jeans, lingering on the dark skin that seemed to offend her very sensibilities. She didn't address Yara directly. Instead, she leaned toward Paula, her voice dropping to a stage whisper designed to carry. "I thought this place had standards," Victoria said, her lips curling into a sneer that twisted her features. "Who let the riffraff in? She looks like she wandered in from a soup kitchen." The words landed like a punch, loud enough to draw heads from nearby tables, a soft chuckle rippling through the diners like a dark undercurrent. A man in a pinstripe suit muttered agreement to his companion, his smirk hidden behind a napkin, while a woman with diamonds glinting at her throat tilted her head, her brow arching in faint amusement. Yara's cheeks burned, heat surging up her neck like wildfire. But she rooted herself to the spot, her breath steadying against the wave of humiliation. She'd faced mockery before, in activist circles where her interracial marriage drew side eyes, in elite galas where she was tokenized, but this felt personal, a blade aimed at her core. "I'm just trying to make a reservation," she said, her voice calm but firm, slicing through the mockery like a lifeline. She met Victoria's gaze unflinchingly, her dark eyes a mirror reflecting the ugliness. Victoria snorted, a harsh bark of laughter that echoed off the chandeliers, turning fully to face her now, her bulk looming over the podium like a shadow. "A reservation? Sweetheart, this isn't some dive bar where you can stroll in off the street," she drawled, her tone dripping with condescension, gesturing at Yara's jeans and the chalk smudges as if they were evidence of a crime. "You've got to dress the part, or don't bother showing up at all. This is Le Château, not a charity event." Her hand waved dismissively, swatting Yara away like an annoying fly, and she turned back to Paula, expecting her to echo the disdain with a nod or a quip. Paula's eyes flicked between them, her smile faltering for a heartbeat, a crack in the facade, before settling into a practiced neutrality. She cleared her throat, a small, uncomfortable sound, but said nothing, her silence a tacit agreement that amplified the venom. It was worse than words. It was permission, a green light for the room to feast on the spectacle. The diners watched openly now, some with brazen stare, others from the corners of their eyes. A man in a velvet blazer smirking into his glass, a woman clutching her pearls with pursed lips, stifling a giggle. Their laughter built, a chorus of disdain that clawed at Yara's pride, each titter a barb sinking deeper. The air buzzed with it, the soft arrogance of wealth turning Yara's simple errand into a public trial. Yara's pulse hammered in her ears, her hands clenching at her sides, the chalk smearing into her palms like war paint. The humiliation seared through her, a living flame, but she refused to shrink. This wasn't about them. It was about Thomas, about their love story etched into these very walls. "Sir, ma'am," she corrected, addressing Victoria directly now, her voice rising just enough to reclaim the space. "I'm not here to disrupt, just to book a table for a special night." Her words were measured, a plea wrapped in steel, thrown into the rising tension like a gauntlet. But Victoria rolled her eyes, a theatrical flourish, and muttered to Paula, "Handle this, will you? My guests are waiting." She strode off toward a window table, her laughter trailing like a taunt, leaving Yara alone with Paula once more. The maitre d' straightened, her composure snapping back, but the air crackled with the poison Victoria had unleashed. Yara's resolve hardened, a steel thread through her spine. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. The mockery hung heavy, a venomous cloud, but beneath it, Yara's fire burned brighter, unquenched. The echo of Victoria Hale's laughter still clung to the air, like a venomous fog, a grating taunt that wove through the gilded hum of Le Château's dining room. Yara Nkosi stood rooted before the maitre d' podium, her gray t-shirt a quiet rebellion against the glittering excess, her dark skin a defiant contrast to the pale opulence surrounding her. Paula Reynolds loomed across the mahogany barrier, her green eyes hardened into unyielding emeralds, the reservation book sealed beneath her manicured hands like a forbidden tome. The tension coiled tighter, a spring wound to its breaking point, as Yara's words, "I'm not here to disrupt," hung unanswered, a fragile thread in the storm. The diners' smirks lingered, their amusement a palpable weight, turning the room into a theater where Yara was the unwilling star. Before Yara could press further, Paula leaned forward, her voice dropping to a cutting whisper that sliced through the lavender-scented stillness. "It's not about the reservation," she hissed, her eyes flicking over Yara's chalk-dusted jeans in untamed curls with deliberate disdain. "We serve a certain clientele here, one that appreciates our standards." The words were a blade, sharp and intentional, their implication unmistakable. Yara's blackness, her unrefined presence, was an intrusion in this temple of privilege. It wasn't just rejection, it was erasure, a dismissal that stripped her to her skin and found it wanting. Yara's breath caught, a familiar ache blooming in her chest like thorns unfurling, the same pain she'd felt in countless spaces where her worth was weighed by appearance alone. But she held Paula's gaze, refusing to let the sting fracture her poise. This was for Thomas, for their shared history etched into these walls, and she wouldn't crumble under the weight of one woman's prejudice. A voice boomed from across the room, shattering the fragile hush like thunder cracking over a serene lake. "Some folks just don't know their place," Victoria Hale crowed from her windowside throne, her ruddy face split by a predatory grin as she raised her wineglass in mock salute. "This isn't a handout spot. Get with the program." Laughter erupted anew, a dark ripple cascading through the tables, harsh barks from men in tuxedos, tittering giggles from women adorned in jewels that could fund entire communities. The sound clawed at Yara's resolve, each chuckle a hook sinking into her pride, pulling at the seams of her composure. Her cheeks flushed with heat, but she anchored herself to the marble floor, her hands clenching at her sides until her nails bit into her palms. The diner's eyes sharpened, a spotlight she hadn't sought. A man in a velvet jacket leaning toward his date with a whispered quip. A woman in a red gown clapping a hand over her mouth to stifle her mirth. Yara felt exposed, her presence dissected under the chandelier's relentless glow, reduced to a spectacle for their entertainment. "I'm just trying to make a reservation," Yara repeated, her voice steady despite the tremor building in her core, addressing Paula once more. "That's all. Nothing more." But Paula's expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew colder, her lips thinning into a razor's edge as she glanced toward Victoria's table, where the woman watched with smug satisfaction. Footsteps approached then, brisk and authoritative, echoing against the marble like the March of Judgment. Margaret Ellis, no, wait, the manager was Paula, but escalation calls for authority. Wait, in the script it's Paula as maitre d', but the outline has Paula as manager? Wait, in the user's script, Paula is the white manager, Yara maitre d'. To escalate, perhaps introduce the escalation through Paula herself, but the script has Paula pushing it. No, an outline. Chapter 4, Paula accuses and demands leave. Victoria taunts, the crowd laughs, then Jamal escorts out. Paula's patience frayed visibly now, her voice rising to reclaim control. "You're disturbing our guests," she snapped, her tone clipped and edged with finality, gesturing toward the laughing diners as if their mockery were proof of Yara's guilt. "I've asked you politely. Now, you need to leave." The accusation landed heavy, a stone in Yara's gut, disbelief warring with the anger surging in her throat. Disturbing them? She, who had entered with nothing but courtesy, now painted as the disruptor, while Victoria's venom flowed unchecked? "How am I disturbing anyone?" Yara echoed, her eyes flashing to the crowd, searching for a shred of reason amid the smirks. "I'm standing here asking for a table. How is that a crime?" Victoria cut in again, her bellow carrying like a trumpet blast. "Oh, honey, some people need it spelled out twice," she crowed, leaning back in her chair with theatrical flair. "This isn't your kind of place. Take the hint." The laughter swelled louder, a cruel chorus that drowned Yara's protest, waves of disdain crashing over her. A woman in pearls shook her head, her lips pursed in amusement. A man with a gold watch barked a laugh into his plate. Paula stepped closer, her presence a wall of authority, her green eyes locking onto Yara's with unyielding force. "Enough," she commanded, her voice low but thunderous. "You're not welcome here, not dressed like that, not acting like this." The room seemed to close in, the stairs a tightening noose, the air thick with the scent of privilege and prejudice. Yara's heart pounded, a wild rhythm against her ribs, her hands trembling but her spine unbent. "Acting like this? All I've done is ask." But Paula raised a hand, a swift gesture that summoned shadows from the edges of the room. "Jamal," she called, her tone a whip crack, leaving no room for doubt. A young man in a black uniform emerged, barely 20, his brown eyes wide with unease, his lanky frame hesitant as he approached. Jamal's face was a mask of reluctance, his hands hovering awkwardly at his sides. He knew this script, had seen it play out in subtler ways, but duty chained him. "Escort her out," Paula ordered, her words final, a gavel striking. Jamal faltered, his gaze flicking to Yara, then back to Paula. But he nodded, the weight of his role overriding his conscience. "Ma'am, please," he murmured, his voice soft, almost apologetic, his hand extending carefully, not touching, but guiding. Yara's breath hitched, the humiliation searing like fire, her mind racing. Thomas, their anniversary, the absurdity of being ejected for existing. "You're throwing me out for this?" she asked, her voice low, trembling with contained fury. "For trying to book a table?" Paula's expression remained stone. "You're causing a scene. Leave, now." Victoria chimed in one last time, her laughter grating. "Finally, too poor to stay, huh?" The room erupted again, the dagger twisting deeper. Yara stood frozen for a beat, the scorn pressing like a vice. But something inside her snapped, not in defeat, but in fierce resolve. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of tears or pleas. With a deliberate breath, she turned, allowing Jamal to guide her toward the door, her sneakers squeaking on the marble like a defiant drum roll. The laughter trailed her, a shadow nipping at her heels. But as Jamal held the glass door open, his eyes downcast in quiet sympathy, Yara paused on the threshold. "You'll see," she whispered. The words a vow meant for the wind, her defiance a spark that refused to die. She stepped into the night, the cool air a balm on her flushed skin, the city's hum swallowing the echoes of scorn, her spirit bruised but unbreakable. The night air outside Le Château wrapped around Yara Nkosi like a cold shroud, the city's relentless hum a distant roar that did little to drown the echoes of scorn still ringing in her ears. She stood on the sidewalk, her sneakers gripping the pavement as if to anchor her against the wave of humiliation that threatened to pull her under. Her gray t-shirt felt too thin against the chill, her chalk-dusted jeans a glaring reminder of the judgment she'd endured inside. The glass doors had swung shut behind her with a final, hollow thud, sealing off the gilded world where her simple request had been twisted into a public shaming. Yara's hands trembled as she clutched her phone, the screen a dim glow in the twilight, her fingers hovering over Thomas's name. Should she call? Spill the ugliness of it all? No, this was supposed to be a surprise, a tribute to their love, not tainted by the bitterness of prejudice. She drew a deep breath, the air sharp with exhaust and distant rain, whispering to herself, "Not yet, hold on." A low electric hum pierced the street symphony, drawing her gaze to the curb. A sleek Tesla Model S glided to a stop, its polished black curves catching the golden spill from the restaurant's windows like a shadow come to life. The engine whispered to silence, and the driver's door opened with a soft click. Thomas Whitaker stepped out, a figure of understated power cutting through the night. At 38, he was a white man whose sharp features and sandy hair belied the quiet intensity that had built his tech empire from garage dreams to billions. His Navy suit fit like a second skin, whispering wealth without the need for flash, and his blue eyes scanned the scene with the precision of a man who'd outmaneuvered boardrooms and algorithms alike. He'd wrapped up an investor call early, a rare pocket of time in his whirlwind schedule, and recalled Yara's casual mention of swinging by Le Château. A chance to surprise her, he'd thought, to sweep in and turn the evening into something magical. But seeing her standing alone outside, her posture a mix of defiance and hurt, ignited a flicker of concern in his chest. What had happened? Inside, the dining room thrummed on, oblivious to the shift brewing beyond its walls. Chandeliers cast their golden haze over white tablecloths, the clink of crystal and murmur of privilege unbroken. Victoria Hale held court at her window table, her boisterous laugh punctuating a tale of yacht escapades, while Paula Reynolds glided back to her podium, her heels clicking with restored order, smoothing the reservation book as if erasing the blemish of Yara's presence. The room had settled, the spectacle forgotten, diners returning to their foie gras and whispered deals. Then the glass door swung open, a gust of cool air slicing through the lavender warmth like an uninvited truth. Thomas stepped inside, his presence a subtle thunder that rippled through the space. His height filled the doorway, his strides purposeful yet silent on the marble, commanding attention without a word. The chatter dipped, a subtle hitch as heads turned, some with idle curiosity, others with dawning recognition. His name carried weight in New York circles, the tech visionary whose innovations had reshaped industries, a billionaire whose philanthropy whispered of deeper values. Tonight, though, he was a husband on a mission, his blue eyes scanning the room with honed focus. They swept past the diners, past Victoria's smug grin, and landed on Yara's silhouette through the glass, alone on the sidewalk. A crease furrowed his brow, confusion sharpening into protective instinct. Paula's head snapped up from the podium, her practiced smile blooming as she registered his suit, his bearing, the hallmarks of a VIP. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice smooth and professional, a stark contrast to the frost she'd unleashed on Yara. "Welcome to Le Château. Do you have a reservation?" Thomas approached the podium, his expression unreadable but edged with quiet intensity, like a storm-gathering force. "I'm meeting my wife," he replied, his voice low and steady, a current beneath calm waters. "Whitaker, Thomas Whitaker." The name dropped like a pebble into a pond, sending ripples outward. Paula's smile faltered, a flicker of recognition widening her eyes. She knew that name, the whispers of his wealth that could eclipse this entire establishment. Her hands hesitated over the reservation book, composure slipping for a heartbeat before she rallied. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her tone brightening, though threaded with uncertainty, "I don't believe we have you down for tonight." Thomas's gaze locked onto hers, unblinking, the air tightening around them. "That's because my wife came to make one," he said, his words deliberate, each a step toward the truth he sensed lurking. "For our anniversary next week. She just stepped out, it seems." He nodded toward the window where Yara stood, her phone in hand, her dark outline a stark figure against the night. Paula's smile froze, her mind racing behind the mask. The black woman in the gray t-shirt, dismissed as an outsider, now tied to this titan. The pieces clicked too late, her earlier frost a ghost returning to haunt. The room held its breath, the diner's chatter fading to a distant drone as subtle shifts occurred. A man pausing his fork mid-air, a woman glancing over her shoulder. Paula's throat bobbed as she swallowed, fingers twitching on the podium. "Your wife was here?" she asked, her voice tiptoeing around the revelation, testing the fragile ground. Thomas's head tilted, his eyes narrowing with gathering storm. "Yes," he affirmed, his tone still calm but laced with an edge that made the chandelier light seem dimmer. "She mentioned our anniversary. You'd remember her. Dark hair, gray t-shirt. Sound familiar?" The question hung like a guillotine, the dining room's atmosphere charging with anticipation, whispers spreading like wildfire. Outside, Yara lifted her head, the Tesla's gleam catching her eye, a spark of recognition igniting in her chest. Thomas was here, her Thomas, and the night teetered on the brink of reckoning, the truth arriving like a long-awaited dawn. The glass door of Le Château stood as a silent sentinel, its polished surface reflecting the golden glow within and the shadowed figure of Yara Nkosi beyond. She lingered on the sidewalk, her breath misting in the chill, her dark eyes fixed on the sleek Tesla that had just arrived. Her phone trembled in her hand, the sting of expulsion raw, a wound carved by Paula's frost and Victoria's venom. Inside, Thomas Whitaker stood at the maître de podium, his navy suit a quiet testament to his power. His voice, a low rumble, pressed Paula with a question that hung like a storm cloud. "You'd remember her, dark hair, gray t-shirt. Sound familiar?" The words tightened the air, and Paula's smile cracked, her pale face draining of color as realization dawned, a shadow creeping over her polished mask. Paula's lips parted, a stammer forming on her tongue, but Thomas didn't wait. He turned, his steps swift and sure, pushing the door open with a whoosh that let the night air rush in. "Yara," he called, his voice soft but firm, cutting through the city's hum like a lifeline. She looked up, her breath catching as their eyes met. His blue sharp with concern, hers dark, flickering with a mix of relief and lingering hurt. He extended a hand, his pale fingers steady, and she took it, her chalk-dusted palm sliding into his with a warmth that grounded her. With a gentle pull, he drew her back inside, the door swinging shut with a thud that echoed like a gavel strike, sealing them in the opulent arena where the battle lines were drawn. The dining room's chatter faltered, a ripple of unease spreading as the couple stepped into the light. their united stance and unspoken challenge. Thomas's arm wrapped protectively around Yara's shoulders, his presence amplifying hers, turning her from outcast to force. "Everything okay?" he murmured, his voice low, meant only for her, his thumb brushing her knuckles in a silent promise. Yara's gaze held his, her lips pressing into a thin line before she whispered, "Not quite." Her tone was steady, but beneath it ran a current of emotion, anger, exhaustion, the weight of the rejection she'd just endured. Thomas's brow furrowed, his eyes searching hers, then flicking back to Paula, who stood frozen at the podium, her hands clutching the reservation book like a shield against the unfolding truth. The room watched, the clink of glasses and murmur of voices fading to a tense hush, the air thick with anticipation. Paula emerged from her stupor, stepping forward with her heels clicking a sharp rhythm on the marble, her blonde hair glinting under the chandeliers. She'd sensed the shift, the disturbance at the entrance, and her green eyes narrowed as she approached, taking in Thomas's suit, his bearing, and Yara beside him in her gray t-shirt. "Is there an issue here?" she asked, her voice smooth but edged, a blade sheathed in silk, directed at the couple as if they were the intruders. Thomas turned to her, his posture unwavering, his calm a storm held in check. "Yes," he said, his words deliberate, each one a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the diners. "I understand my wife was just asked to leave your establishment." Paula's professional mask slipped, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she regained composure, her eyes darting between Thomas's unmistakable wealth and Yara's casual attire, her mind racing to reconcile the two. "A misunderstanding," she said quickly, her tone practiced, a defense honed from years of gatekeeping. "We have certain standards for our guests. Dress code, decorum." She was disruptive. Thomas's head tilted, his voice steady, but laced with an edge that made the air shiver. "Standards?" he repeated, the word hanging like a challenge, his blue eyes locking onto Paula's with unyielding force. "What standards exactly would bar my wife from making a simple reservation? The ones that judge her by her clothes, her skin, instead of who she is?" The question landed like a thunderclap, reverberating through the marble hall, the diners shifting uncomfortably in their seats, smirks fading, eyes averting as the spectacle turned inward. Yara stood tall beside him, her silence a powerful statement, her dark hand clasped in his pale one, their unity a beacon that exposed the room's fractures. Before Paula could muster a response, a voice boomed from the window table, shattering the tension like glass underfoot. "She was disruptive," Victoria Hale bellowed, leaning forward in her chair, her ruddy face flushed with wine and bravado. She gestured toward Yara with a meaty hand, her gold cufflinks glinting like accusations. "Some people don't belong in a place like this. Look at her." The dining room froze, every eye swiveling to Victoria, then back to Thomas and Yara. The laughter that had once buoyed her taunts was gone, replaced by a charged stillness, the air electric with the weight of confrontation. Thomas turned slowly, his blue eyes locking onto Victoria with a precision that could cut steel, sizing her up like a flaw in code he was about to debug. "And you are?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm, a predator assessing prey. Victoria puffed out her chest, undeterred, her grin widening with self-importance. "Victoria Hale," she declared, her tone dripping with entitlement, as if the name alone commanded deference. "Regular here. I know how things work, and she doesn't fit." Thomas's gaze sharpened, his calm cracking just enough to reveal the fury beneath. "You weighed in on how they treated my wife," he said, his words soft but lethal, a blade sliding from its sheath, "telling her she doesn't belong, mocking her in front of everyone." Victoria's confidence wavered, a flicker of doubt creasing her brow, but she doubled down, waving at Yara's jeans and t-shirt. She didn't look the part, simple as that. This is Le Château, not some community center. The room held its breath, diners' faces a gallery of shock and curiosity, their earlier amusement souring into discomfort. Thomas stepped forward, his voice rising just enough to carry, each word a hammer striking stone. "My wife, Yara Nkosi," he began, deliberate and resonant, "community advocate, co-founder of the Whitaker Foundation, the woman who just wanted to book our anniversary dinner here, where we had our first date years ago. The revelation thundered through the space, Paula's face blanching further, her hands tightening on the podium as the truth unraveled her defenses. Yara's hand tightened in Thomas's, her breath steadying, her silence amplifying his words, a strength he drew from like fuel. The diner shifted, whispers spreading, a man in velvet setting down his glass, a woman in pearls averting her eyes, the facade of privilege cracking under the mirror Thomas held up. "She came here for us," he continued, his gaze sweeping the room, voice softening but edged with fire. "And you judged her by her sweater, her skin, not her worth, not the lives she's changed, not the love we've built against odds like this." The accusation hung, a searing light exposing the prejudice woven into the restaurant's very fabric. Victoria's bravado faltered, her grin twitching as she registered the steel in his stare. The room's dynamic shifting, the amusement that had fueled her now a heavy silence, discomfort settling like dust. Paula interjected, her voice strained, stepping forward in a bid for control. "Mr. Whitaker, perhaps we can discuss this privately." But Thomas's eyes didn't leave Victoria, his decision etched in stone. Yara felt the tide turning, no triumph in her chest, only a quiet ache for the ugliness laid bare. But standing beside him, she was unbreakable. The confrontation peaked, a reckoning that pierced the gilded veil, leaving the room raw and exposed. Le Château's dining room hung in a charged silence, the air thick with the weight of Thomas Whitaker's accusation. A mirror held up to the gilded prejudice that had long festered beneath the chandelier's golden glow. "You judged her by her sweater, her skin, not her worth," his words echoed, slicing through the opulence like a blade through silk. Thomas stood beside Yara Nkosi, his navy suit a stark contrast to her gray t-shirt, his pale hand clasped around her dark one, their unity a defiant beacon that exposed every crack in the room's facade. Victoria Hale's bravado crumbled, her ruddy face twitching as she shrank back in her chair, the wine glass forgotten in her grip. Paula Reynolds gripped the podium tightly, her green eyes darting wildly, the truth unraveling her composure thread by thread. The diners, once a smug audience, now shifted uncomfortably, a gallery of averted gazes and whispered unease, their laughter extinguished like candles in a gale. A sudden movement shattered the hush, bold and unyielding. Jamal, the young staffer who'd escorted Yara out mere moments ago, stepped forward from the shadows near the entrance. His black uniform hung loose on his lanky frame, his brown eyes blazing with a fire that belied his earlier hesitation. The room's eyes turned to him, a ripple of surprise spreading as he tugged off his jacket with a sharp jerk, tossing it onto the podium beside Paula like a discarded chain. "She tried explaining several times," Jamal said, his voice trembling but clear, cutting through the silence like a clarion call. "No one listened. You all just saw her skin, her clothes, and decided she didn't belong. Well, I'm done with this. Done with a place that treats people like trash, based on how they look." His words landed like gunfire, Paula's face paling further as she stared at him, her mouth opening in protest. "Jamal, don't be ridiculous," she started, her tone a desperate grasp at authority. But he shook his head, his resolve an unbreakable wall. "I quit," he declared, the statement a thunderclap that echoed off the marble walls, leaving the staff frozen and the diners stunned. Jamal stood tall, no longer a shadow in uniform, but a man claiming his dignity, his exit a spark igniting the room's dormant conscience. The fracture widened, the air electric with the unraveling. From a table near the back, an elderly couple rose with deliberate grace, their movements slow but resolute, like ancient oaks bending to a righteous wind. The woman, her silver hair swept into an elegant bun, wore a simple black dress that whispered of old money and quiet wisdom. Her husband, stooped but steady, adjusted his tie with trembling hands, his lined face etched with disapproval. They crossed the dining room, their steps a quiet drumbeat against the marble, drawing every eye as they stopped before Thomas and Yara. The woman's voice carried the weight of decades, clear and unwavering. "Young man," she addressed Thomas, her eyes meeting his with a nod of respect, You're right. This place has lost its soul. She turned, her gaze sweeping Paula, the waitstaff, and the frozen diners, landing finally on Victoria, who shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. We've dined here for years, the woman continued, her tone laced with sorrow and steel. But tonight is the last. This used to be about elegance and character, not this ugly game of appearances and exclusion. Shame on you all. Her husband nodded, his gruff voice adding ballast. We're done, he said, his eyes piercing Victoria's now faltering grin. No more supporting a spot that kicks out good folks while letting bullies like you run the show. The rebuke silenced the room further, Victoria's face reddening as she cleared her throat, attempting a retort. Now, Margaret, wait, you're overreacting, she blustered, addressing the elderly woman with forced familiarity, but the woman cut her off sharply. No, Victoria, you don't get to decide what's right here. Not anymore. The elderly couple, the Ellises, turned then, linking arms as they made their way to the door, their departure a crack in the ivory tower's foundation, whispers spreading among the tables like fissures in glass. Diners exchanged uneasy glances, some setting down utensils, the once vibrant hum reduced to a tense murmur. Yara's hand tightened in Thomas's, her breath steadying as the tide shifted, a quiet ache in her chest, not triumph, but a profound sadness for the ugliness exposed. Thomas turned to her, his blue eyes softening amid the fire, but his resolve burned bright. Let's go, she murmured, her voice a tether pulling him from the fray, her dark eyes reflecting the room's shattered illusion. He nodded, his decision swift. Not yet, he replied softly, then faced Paula, who'd stepped forward in a frantic bid for damage control, her hands clasped desperately. Mr. Whitaker, please, let's discuss this privately. We can make arrangements. But Yara spoke then, her words clear and cutting, locking eyes with Paula. You were clear about your standards, she said, her tone measured but unyielding. I didn't meet them, and now neither does this place for us. Thomas echoed her, his voice ringing out. Our anniversary was about real values, he said, addressing the room one last time. Not this hollow shell. You've shown your true colors tonight. With that, he guided Yara toward the door, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the marble, a sound that now carried defiance rather than intrusion. Jamal followed a few paces behind, his steps lighter, freed from the uniform's weight, pausing to nod at them. Thank you, he said, his brown eyes earnest, for standing up, not just for her, but for what's right. The glass door loomed ahead, a portal back to the night, and as they reached it, the dining room watched in stunned silence. Paula frozen at her post, Victoria deflated in her seat. The Ellises already vanished into the shadows outside. Thomas pushed the door open, the cool air rushing in like a cleansing breath. Yara stepping through first, their unity a final rebuke to the exclusion that had defined the evening. The facade of privilege lay cracked, the room left to grapple with the truth they'd unleashed, a silence heavier than any laughter that had come before. The city's skyline stretched above like a canvas of stars piercing the urban glow, a quiet witness to the passage of time since that fateful night at Le Château. Yara Nkosi stood outside a modest brick building on Harlem's vibrant streets, its windows spilling warm, inviting light onto the cracked sidewalk. The sign above read, Community Haven, a pay-what-you-can eatery where worth wasn't measured by wallet or wardrobe, but by the shared humanity that bound its patrons. Yara wore a simple sundress now, her curls loose and free, her chalk-dusted jeans traded for comfort that embraced her true self. Beside her, Thomas Whitaker stood tireless, his sandy hair ruffled by the evening breeze, his blue eyes soft with contentment. Tonight marked their 10th anniversary, not in the opulent halls where their love had first sparked, but in a place that mirrored the values they'd forged together: resilience, equality, and unyielding connection. The door swung open with a welcoming creak, releasing the rich aromas of garlic-roasted chicken, fresh-baked cornbread, and simmering collard greens, scents that wrapped around them like a warm embrace. Inside, long wooden tables buzzed with life, families sharing stories over heaping plates, lone diners finding solace in the communal hum, workers in worn coats laughing with strangers who'd become friends in the span of a meal. Balloons bobbed above a child's birthday celebration at one end, while an elderly man spooned soup with trembling hands at another, his smile shy but genuine. No chandeliers here, just soft overhead lights casting a golden hue over faces of every shade and story. A young server greeted them with a grin that reached her eyes, no judgment in her welcome, leading them to a table nestled amid the lively tapestry. Yara settled into her chair, her shoulders easing as the memory of Le Château's cold marble faded like a distant shadow. Thomas reached for her hand under the table, his pale fingers intertwining with her dark ones, a quiet ritual that grounded them. "Happy anniversary," he murmured, his voice low and tender, carrying the weight of a decade's triumphs and trials. She smiled, the ache from that night now a faint echo, replaced by the warmth blooming in her chest. Their meal arrived simple and soulful: juicy roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes flecked with herbs, and cornbread that crumbled under her fork with buttery perfection. It tasted of care, of hands that prepared it with love rather than pretense, each bite a reminder that true luxury lay in authenticity. Conversations flowed around them, unscripted and free, a child's gleeful squeal as icing smeared across a parent's cheek, the elderly man's gruff tale of old Harlem days shared with a nodding neighbor. Yara watched, her heart swelling with gratitude for this haven, a space where her blackness wasn't a barrier, but a thread in the vibrant weave. Thomas squeezed her hand, his eyes reflecting the same quiet joy. "This is us," he said softly, leaning in. "Not the flash, not the exclusion, just real connection." Yara nodded, her voice a whisper amid the clatter of plates. "We've come so far from that first date. Back then, it was about proving we could belong anywhere. Now it's about choosing where we thrive." The door chimed again, and Jamal stepped in, his lanky frame wrapped in a casual jacket, his brown eyes bright with purpose. He'd reached out days after the confrontation, his voice crackling with excitement over the phone as he pitched a youth leadership program to the Whitaker Foundation, a bridge for kids like him, caught in the crossfire of prejudice and potential. Yara had guided him through the proposal, drawing from her own community work, and Thomas had funded it without hesitation, seeing in Jamal the spark they'd fought to protect. Now Jamal wove through the tables with a grin, spotting them and waving. "You made it," Yara said as he pulled up a chair, her tone warm like an old friend. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, his gaze sweeping the room with evident appreciation. "This place, it's real. No walls, no judgments, just people being people." The server brought Jamal a plate, and they ate together, the clink of forks a harmonious rhythm underscoring their shared stories. Jamal spoke animatedly of his program, workshops starting soon, teens from overlooked neighborhoods learning to lead, to challenge the systems that had once dismissed him. "That night changed everything," he admitted, his voice earnest. "Seeing you two stand up, not backing down, it showed me I could too. The funding? That's just the start. We're building something that lasts." Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You earned it. Places like Le Château thrive on division. We thrive on lifting each other." Yara leaned forward, her eyes shining. "Worth isn't skin or status," she said, her words a quiet manifesto, tracing the faces around them, the laughing family, the solitary elder, the diverse tapestry of lives intersecting. "It's this: character, connection, the courage to see beyond appearances." Thomas squeezed her hand again, his voice low with affection. "You've always known that, and you keep showing me every day." The night stretched on, warm and alive, laughter erupting as the child's birthday song filled the air, plates cleared and refilled with generous seconds. Yara thought of their first date at Le Château, Thomas's nervous charm, his hand brushing hers, their love a defiance of the world's rigid rules. That place had tested them, its prejudice a crucible. But here, in this unassuming haven, they'd reclaimed their story, stronger, truer. Beyond these walls, the ripples of that night had spread like wildfire. Whispers turned to outrage as a scathing article in a major New York paper exposed Le Château's exclusivity, social media amplifying the tale of Yara's ejection and Thomas's stand. Patrons boycotted, reviews plummeted, and the once unassailable bastion crumbled under the glare of accountability. Paula had resigned amid the scandal, her polished armor shattered. Victoria's name became synonymous with entitlement in elite circles, her invitations drying up like forgotten wine. The restaurant changed hands, its new owners stripping away the velvet ropes, renaming it with a promise of inclusivity. All welcome. A fragile vow, but one that echoed the change Yara and Thomas had ignited. Paula had even penned a letter to Yara, raw with regret, not just for that evening, but for the patterns she'd perpetuated, a step toward unlearning. Yara had read it, felt its weight, and set it aside. Forgiveness, not immediate, but the door cracked open for growth. Under Community Haven's dim lights, Yara leaned into Thomas, the hum of the room a soothing lullaby. Jamal leaned forward, breaking her reverie. "You two didn't just change that night for me," he said, his tone fervent. "You showed everyone what happens when you push back. It's not over. It's spreading." Yara smiled, small but radiant. "It's just starting," she agreed, her eyes meeting Thomas's, a silent vow renewing between them. The stars outside glittered, a silent chorus to their triumph. And as the evening wound down, plates empty and hearts full, Yara felt the true essence of their anniversary. Not in grandeur, but in the quiet power of love that bridged divides, healed wounds, and built futures. This was their celebration, a testament to resilience, a beacon for those still fighting to be seen. And in that warmth, they lingered, savoring the victory of authenticity over artifice. Their story a ripple destined to become a wave. As Yara and Thomas's story fades into the vibrant pulse of New York's night, we invite you to share what their journey stirred in your heart. How did their stand against prejudice resonate with you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice fuels these tales of resilience and truth. We're deeply grateful for joining us on this ride through exclusion and triumph, and your presence makes these stories come alive. Hit that subscribe button to stay with us for more narratives that challenge, inspire, and uplift. Where are you watching from, and what do you hope to see next? Until our next story, keep shining and standing tall. See you soon.